Nobody tells you what it actually feels like. Falling in love with your best friend. They make it look so simple in movies, one meaningful glance, one perfect moment, and suddenly everything clicks into place. But the truth is messier than that. The truth is you spend months noticing things you were never supposed to notice. The way she laughs. The way she remembers everything you've ever told her. The way she looks at you sometimes just a second too long and you tell yourself it means nothing because the alternative is too terrifying to consider. The truth is, falling in love with your best friend is the most beautiful and the most frightening thing that has ever happened to me. My name is Nora. I'm 24 years old. I write stories for a living, other people's stories, mostly. Blog posts, brand narratives, ghost-written memoirs for people who lived bold, fearless lives. I pour words onto a page about courage and adventure and stepping into the unknown. And then I close my laptop, turn on every light in my apartment, and sit very still in the brightness, grateful that I don't have to actually be any of those things. I am a writer who is afraid of the dark. And before you think that's a small, manageable, slightly embarrassing quirk, let me tell you what the dark actually does to me. It starts in my chest. A tightening, like something is slowly wrapping its hands around my ribs and squeezing. Then my breathing changes shallow, quick, useless. My vision does something strange, even though there's nothing to see. My brain, brilliant and treacherous, starts filling in the emptiness with shapes that aren't there, with sounds that don't exist, with the memory of a door slamming shut, and a lock clicking, and a small girl screaming herself hoarse in a basement that smelled like wet concrete and old wood. I was 7 years old. My brother, he was 12, just old enough to be cruel in that casual, thoughtless way that boys sometimes are, locked me in the basement as a joke. He thought I'd be down there for 5 minutes before he let me out, laughing. But he got distracted. He forgot. And I was in that basement, in complete darkness, for 4 hours. 4 hours doesn't sound like a long time. Unless you're 7. Unless you're alone. Unless the dark is so thick it feels like it has weight, like it's pressing down on your shoulders, your chest, your throat. Unless you're calling for your mother and no one comes. That was the night something broke inside me. And in 17 years, I had never fully figured out how to fix it. I was sitting at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in early June, staring at a blank document on my screen that was supposed to be the first chapter of my novel, the one I had been about to start for 3 years when my phone buzzed. Jade. Even her name made something warm happen in my chest. I both loved and hated that. I answered before it could ring twice. "Tell me you're not still staring at that blank document," she said, without even saying hello first. I minimized the blank document. "I'm not staring at the blank document." "Nora." "Jade." "I can hear you lying." I laughed despite myself, spinning slightly in my chair. That was the thing about Jade. She had this way of making me laugh even when I was sitting inside my own anxiety like it was a locked room. We had been best friends since our second year of university. When she sat down next to me in a creative writing seminar, leaned over, and whispered, "If this professor says the word catharsis one more time, I'm going to catharsis my way right out of this building," and I had laughed so hard I nearly fell off my chair. That was 5 years ago. In those 5 years, she had become the most important person in my life. That was the problem. Because somewhere between year 3 and year 4, something had shifted. Something quiet and devastating and completely inconvenient. I had started noticing the way she tucked her dark hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The way she laughed with her whole body. The way she always remembered small things, that I took my coffee with oat milk, that I hated the sound of balloons, that I needed the window seat on trains, or I'd spend the whole journey quietly falling apart. I noticed all of it. I cataloged all of it. And then I locked it in a room in my chest and pretended it wasn't there, because Jade was my best friend, and losing her would be its own kind of darkness, the kind no lamp could fix. "I have an idea," she said, and the way she said it, bright, certain, slightly dangerous, made me sit up straighter. That sentence has never once led somewhere good. That sentence has led somewhere great, every single time. I could hear her smiling. "Okay, hear me out. I'm already nervous. Camping." The word landed like a stone in still water. "No," I said. "Nora, absolutely not. Just listen. Jade, you want me to sleep outside, in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, with bears. There aren't going to be bears. There are always bears, Nora." Her voice softened, and that was somehow worse than when she was teasing me, because soft Jade was harder to say no to. "I'm talking about Emerald Lake, in the Rockies. I've been looking at it for weeks. It's incredible. The water is this unreal shade of green, and there are mountains on every side, and the air is so clean you can actually taste it." She paused. "I want to go with you. Only you." Something pulled in my chest. Hard. "I can't," I whispered. "You can. Jade, you know I can't do the dark. You know that." There was a brief silence. Then, quietly, "I'll stay with you. The whole time. I promise." "You can't promise that. Watch me." And then, so easily, so casually, like she was suggesting we share a blanket during a movie. "I'll hold you all night if I have to. I'm not going anywhere." I closed my eyes. I want you to understand what those words did to me. Not just as comfort, not just as reassurance, but as the words of the person I was desperately, secretly in love with, offering to hold me through my worst fear. It was the kindest and most torturous thing anyone had ever said to me. "I'll think about it," I heard myself say. I said yes 3 days later, and spent the following 2 weeks regretting it completely. The anxiety arrived before the trip did. It moved into my apartment like an unwelcome roommate, sitting with me at breakfast, following me to my desk, sliding into bed beside me at night. I started doing research I shouldn't have. Panic attacks in remote areas, nighttime temperatures in the Rockies, distance from the nearest hospital. I started making lists, packing and unpacking my bag. Lying awake at 2, am running through every possible scenario in which things went terribly wrong. And underneath all of it, quieter but more relentless, was the other fear, the one that had nothing to do with darkness. What if she finds out? What if she sees it on my face, the way I look at her, and everything changes? What if I say yes to this trip, and somewhere between the mountains and the dark, I stop being able to hide it? My mother called on a Wednesday afternoon, and I made the mistake of telling her about the trip. "Camping?" She said it the same way I had, like a foreign word. "Nora, you still sleep with the lights on. You nearly had a breakdown when the power went out last February." "I know, Mom. I just don't understand why you'd put yourself through that." "Because Jade asked me to. Because I'm trying to be braver." A pause. "There are easier ways to be brave." I stared at the ceiling after we hung up. The familiar weight of her doubt settled over me, mixing with my own. My mother wasn't cruel. She loved me. in her practical, worried way, but she had a talent for naming all the ways I might fail before I'd even had a chance to try. I opened my laptop. The blank document was still waiting. Chapter 1, I typed, for the 100th time. And then, for the 100th time, I stared at it until the words blurred. The morning we left for Emerald Lake, Jade arrived at my door at 6:30 a.m. with 2 coffees, a backpack the size of a small child, and energy that should have been illegal that early in the morning. "You packed light," she said, looking at my bag. "I panic-packed. I don't actually know what's in there." She grinned and handed me my coffee, oat milk, no sugar, exactly right, and something about that small, perfect gesture made my throat tighten. "Stop it," I told myself. Stop noticing. The drive to the Rockies took most of the day. We talked the way we always did, easily, openly, jumping between topics without warning. She made me laugh 4 times before we even left the city. Somewhere around the 3rd hour, I put my feet up on the dashboard and she reached over without looking and tapped my ankle twice, like a full stop at the end of a sentence. And then her hand went back to the wheel like it had never happened. But I felt it. I felt every single second of it. The mountains appeared gradually, then all at once, enormous and ancient and indifferent, pushing up through the horizon like they'd always been there, waiting. I pressed my face close to the window and felt something loosen in my chest for the first time in weeks. There was something about their size that made my fear feel smaller. Not gone, just smaller. "See?" Jade said softly, watching me. "Don't say I told you so." "I would never." She was smiling. "I'm saving that for later." Emerald Lake was exactly what she'd promised. The water was extraordinary, a deep, surreal green that didn't look real, like someone had painted it. The mountains curved around it on all sides, their peaks still carrying snow, their reflections rippling in the water below. The air smelled like pine and cold stone, and something I didn't have a word for, but that felt, somehow, like before, like the world before it got complicated. We set up camp in the late afternoon, Jade handling the tent with calm competence, while I attempted to help and mostly got in the way. She didn't make me feel useless about it, she just laughed and guided my hands and said, "There, perfect," when it was decidedly not perfect, and the tent went up anyway. For a few hours, I forgot to be afraid. We walked the trail along the lakeshore, talking about nothing and everything. The light was golden and long, the way it gets in the late afternoon in high places, and it turned the water a deeper shade of green and made Jade's hair shine like something from a painting. I caught myself staring twice. Both times, I looked away quickly at the mountains. It was on the walk back that I miscalculated. We had gone further than I realized, and the sun, which had been so generous all afternoon, moved fast in the mountains. By the time I noticed the light changing, it was already too late. The golden hour had ended. The sky had deepened from blue to purple to something darker, and the trees around the trail had started to lose their edges, their shapes bleeding into one another, until they were just masses of shadow pressing in from both sides. The path beneath our feet was still visible, but only just. "No, no, no." "Jade." My voice came out strange, thin. "Almost back," she said easily. "Maybe 10 minutes. Jade, it's getting dark." Something in my tone made her turn. She looked at me, really looked, and I watched her expression shift as she registered what she was seeing. The way I had stopped walking. The way my hands had come up to my own arms, gripping. The way I was staring at the trees like they were about to move. Hey, she was in front of me immediately. I'm right here. I know, the tightening had started. The one in my chest, the one that meant it was coming. I just need the light I need it to not be. Nora, look at me. I looked at her. In the dimming light, her eyes were very steady, very dark, very calm. You are safe, she said, each word separate and deliberate. I am right here. You are not alone. My breathing was coming too fast. I could feel the edges of the panic arriving, that horrible static at the edges of my vision. The way the world starts to tilt when your brain decides that darkness equals danger, equals that basement, that door, that lock. Jade. Her name came out like a plea. And then her hand found mine in the dark. Her fingers wrapped around mine, warm, firm, certain, and she held on. I've got you, she said quietly. I've got you, Nora. I'm not letting go. The panic didn't disappear, but it stopped advancing. We walked the last 10 minutes back to camp like that, her hand in mine, her voice low and steady, talking me through every step. By the time the warm glow of our camp lantern came into view, I was shaking but upright, frightened but present. She didn't let go of my hand until we were inside the tent. And even then, she let go slowly, like she wanted to make sure I wouldn't fall. I lay in my sleeping bag that night, the small lantern glowing between us, and listened to the dark press itself against the thin walls of the tent. Outside, the lake was invisible. The mountains were invisible. The whole world had gone black and quiet and enormous. But Jade was 3 feet away, lying on her side, watching me with those steady eyes. You okay? She asked softly. Not really, I admitted, which was the most honest I'd been all trip. She nodded slowly. Then, without a word, she picked up her sleeping bag and moved it closer to mine. Not touching, just closer. Better? She asked. My heart was doing something complicated and painful and completely beyond my control. A little, I whispered. She smiled, small and soft and just for me, and reached over and turned the lantern down 1 setting, but not off. Never off. Not for me. Try to sleep, she said gently. I'm right here. Outside, the dark deepened. Inside, I lay very still, very close to the girl I was desperately in love with, and tried to remember how to breathe. And somewhere in the quiet, in the almost dark, with her steady breathing beside me, I wanted so desperately to believe that just this, could be enough. I want to tell you that I fell asleep easily that night. I really do. I want to tell you that Jade's presence was enough, that her steady breathing and her quiet warmth and the small golden glow of the lantern were sufficient to hold the darkness back, and that I drifted off peacefully, like someone who had finally found rest after a long, exhausting journey. But that would be a lie. And this is not that kind of story. The truth is, I lay awake for a long time, rigid, listening, my eyes tracing the curved walls of the tent like I was mapping an escape route I hoped I'd never need. Every sound the forest made, every shift of wind through the pines, every distant crack of a branch, every soft, unknowable rustling in the undergrowth landed on my skin like a cold finger. The lantern helped. It always helped, a little. But lanterns have limits. Their light only reaches so far. And beyond that small, warm circle, the dark was absolute. The kind of dark you only find far from cities, far from streets, far from every artificial comfort that modern life uses to keep the night at bay. Out here, the darkness was honest. It made no apologies. It simply was vast and ancient and completely indifferent to the small, frightened girl lying inside a thin piece of nylon, trying desperately not to come apart. Jade had fallen asleep about an hour after we'd settled. I knew the exact moment it happened. Her breathing changed, deepened, slowed into that rhythm that means a person has left the waking world behind. I turned my head and looked at her in the dim light. Her face in sleep was different from her face awake, softer. The confidence that she carried so naturally through every waking moment had gentled into something quieter, something almost young. I looked at her for a long time. I love you, I thought, in the terrible, honest silence of my own mind. I love you, and I don't know what to do with it, and I am so afraid not just of this darkness outside, but of the one inside me that says you'll never feel the same way, that I'll ruin everything just by wanting you, that the safest thing I can do is keep this locked up forever and just be grateful you're here at all. The wind moved through the trees outside, and the tent walls shivered slightly, and my chest tightened. I pressed my eyes shut. Don't, I told myself. Don't spiral. Stay here. Stay in this moment. I don't know exactly when the panic attack started that night in the tent. That's the thing about them, they don't announce themselves. They build in the background, quiet and patient, while you're busy trying to hold yourself together. And then suddenly you realize the walls are too close and the air is too thin and your heart is doing something that can't possibly be normal and the dark is everywhere. I sat up. My hands were shaking. My breath was coming in short, desperate pulls that weren't doing anything useful, weren't bringing in enough air, and the tent walls were pressing in, and the lantern felt too small and too far away, and I needed light. I needed more light. I needed Nora, Jade's voice, low and immediate and wide awake. I hadn't even heard her stir. I can't. The words dissolved. I pressed a hand to my chest, feeling my own heartbeat hammering against my palm, too fast, too hard. I can't, Jade. I can't breathe. The dark, I know. She was upright already, moving toward me, her sleeping bag falling away. I know. I'm here. I'm right here. Her hands found my face in the dim light, both palms, cupping my cheeks gently, turning my face toward hers. In the faint glow of the lantern, her eyes were dark and serious and completely devastatingly present. "Look at my eyes," she said. "Just my eyes. Nothing else." I looked. "Good. Now breathe with me. In slowly. Come on, follow me." She breathed in, deliberately, exaggeratedly slow, and something in my body, despite itself, tried to follow, and out. Slow. There you go. In, out. Her eyes holding mine like an anchor holds a ship in a storm, not stopping the waves, but keeping the vessel from being lost. "You're safe," she said softly, her thumbs moving in small, gentle arcs against my cheekbones. "You're in a tent at Emerald Lake, and the mountains are right outside, and I am sitting right in front of you, and you are completely, absolutely safe." "It's so dark," I whispered. My voice sounded like a child's. "I know. I hate it. I hate that I'm like this. I hate that I can't just—" My voice broke, and I hated that too. The breaking of it. The giving away of how scared I really was. Hey. Her voice was fierce and quiet at the same time. Don't do that. Don't hate yourself for this. It's pathetic, Jade. I'm 24 years old and I'm having a panic attack in a tent. You're 24 years old and you're dealing with something that was done to you when you were 7. She said it with a certainty that left no room for argument. That's not pathetic, that's human. Something in my chest cracked open at those words. Not dramatically. Not all at once. Just a hairline fracture, like the first break in ice in early spring. Small, but significant. The kind that means the thaw has begun. I breathed. In and out. Her hands still on my face. Her eyes still on mine. Slowly, slowly, the panic began to recede. Come here, she said quietly. She moved her sleeping bag beside mine until there was no gap between them, and then she lay down and opened her arms and looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read in the low light, something that was steadiness and softness and something else underneath both of those things, something she wasn't quite letting me see yet. I hesitated for only a moment. Then I lay down beside her, and she pulled me close, and her arms wrapped around me, one across my shoulders, one at my back, and she held me the way you hold someone when you mean it. Not loosely, not casually, firmly, like she had decided she was keeping me here and that was final. My face was close to her collarbone. I could feel the warmth radiating off her. I could hear her heartbeat steady, strong, nothing like my own. Better? She murmured into my hair. I closed my eyes. The dark was still there. Outside the tent, the night was still vast and lightless and enormous. But it was further away now, held back, somehow, by the circle of her arms. Yes, I whispered. Better. We lay in silence for a while. The forest settled. The wind dropped to almost nothing. The only sounds were our breathing, and the faint, distant sound of the lake, and the soft creak of trees that had stood in these mountains for longer than any fear or any love story. I don't know how much time passed. And then Jade spoke. Nora. Her voice was different. Something had shifted in it. The steadiness was still there, but underneath it something had surfaced. Something careful and exposed and real. Yeah, I said softly. A pause. The kind that has weight. There's something I need to tell you. She stopped. Started again. There's something I've been not telling you for a long time. My heart, which had only just begun to slow, picked up again, but differently this time. Not with fear, with something else entirely. Okay? I breathed. I felt her exhale long and shaky, and nothing like the controlled, steady breathing she'd been modeling for me minutes ago. Jade, who was afraid of almost nothing, was afraid right now. I could feel it in the slight tension of her arms, the way her breath had changed. I am so in love with you, she said. The words fell into the quiet of the tent, like the first drops of rain before a storm small, and then suddenly enormous. I have been for over a year. Her voice was low and unsteady and more honest than anything I'd ever heard from her. And I have been so careful. So careful not to show it. Not to make things weird. Not to risk losing you, because losing you would be. She stopped. I didn't think you felt the same way. And I couldn't stand the idea of making you uncomfortable or changing what we have. So I kept it. I kept it to myself. And I told myself it was enough. Just being near you. Just being the person you called and the person you laughed with and the person you trusted. Another pause, smaller. But tonight, watching you be so brave, Coming out here even though you were terrified, fighting through that panic attack instead of running, I just couldn't keep it inside anymore. Silence. Complete, ringing silence. And then I started crying. Not from sadness. I want to be clear about that. I need you to understand that those tears were not grief, they were release. They were the feeling of something you've been carrying alone for so long that your arms have gone numb. And then someone walks up beside you and says, "Here, let me take some of that," and your body doesn't know how to process the sudden lightness. Jade. Her name came out waterlogged and wrecked and wonderful. "You don't have to say anything," she said quickly, her arms tightening slightly. I needed you to know. That's all. You don't have to." "I'm in love with you too." Silence again. But a different kind this time. "I have been for more than a year," I continued, my voice still unsteady but growing firmer, because these words had been locked in the dark inside me for too long, and they deserved to be said in full. And I was so terrified of ruining everything that I buried it. I kept showing up as your best friend, and pretending that was enough, and telling myself it was fine, that I was fine, that I didn't need more than what we had. I pulled back just enough to look at her face. In the faint lantern light, her eyes were bright. "But it wasn't fine, Jade. It was never fine. Because every time you laughed, every time you remembered how I take my coffee, every time you held my hand in the dark, it was everything. It was always everything." She looked at me for a long moment, and then, very slowly, she smiled. It started small, just the corners of her mouth, just a trembling, almost disbelieving curve, and then it grew into something full and real and incandescent, and in the dim glow of the lantern, it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. "We're both idiots," she said softly. I laughed a watery, broken, utterly genuine laugh. "The biggest idiots. More than a year. More than a year," I agreed. She shook her head slowly, still smiling, and then she pulled me back into her arms and held me close, and I buried my face against her shoulder, and we lay there in the almost dark, laughing a little and crying a little and holding each other in the specific way of people who have just handed each other something precious and fragile and true. Here is what I remember most about the rest of that night. The dark was still there. I want to be honest about that, it didn't vanish. The night outside the tent was still vast and lightless, and everything it had always been. My fear didn't evaporate in the moment Jade told me she loved me. Trauma doesn't work that way. Healing doesn't work that way. Any story that tells you love is a cure is lying to you. But something shifted. The darkness was the same. And I was different inside it. Because for the first time in 17 years, I was not alone in the dark. Not just accompanied, not just someone nearby as a courtesy or a kindness, but genuinely, bone deep, not alone. Someone knew my fear and had chosen to stay anyway. Someone had pressed their warmth against the cold place inside me and was still here, still holding on. That changes things. That changes everything. I fell asleep sometime before dawn, tucked against Jade's side, her heartbeat steady beneath my ear, the lantern glowing its faithful gold beside us. And I did not dream of basements. The rest of the trip was different. Not perfect, I'm not going to tell you it was perfect, because that's not what life offers even its most romantic stories. There were moments of fear. There were moments I had to breathe through the dark while Jade held my hand and talked me back from the edge. There was one night where the lantern battery died without warning, and I gripped Jade so hard she later joked that she had the fingerprints on her arm to prove it. But there were other moments, too. There was a morning where I woke before Jade and lay watching pale rose light move slowly across the tent ceiling, listening to the lake and the birds and the extraordinary silence of the mountains, and realized I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. There was an afternoon on the lake shore where we sat with our feet in the shockingly cold green water, her shoulder pressed against mine, and she said, "You should write about this." And I said, "I am already writing it in my head." And she laughed and leaned over and pressed her lips to my temple so softly, it felt like a question and an answer at the same time. There was the last evening when we sat outside the tent as the sun went down over the mountains and painted the lake every shade of gold and amber and deep burning rose, and I sat between Jade's knees with her arms around me and her chin resting on my shoulder, and I watched the light leave the sky, and I did not look away. I watched it go. I watched the dark arrive slow, inevitable, ancient, and I took a breath, and I let it come. It was still the dark, but it was not my enemy anymore. We drove home on a Sunday morning with the windows down and mountain air still in our lungs. Jade drove. I had my feet on the dashboard and her hand in mine and a notebook open on my lap. Because somewhere in those last 3 days something had come loose inside me, some blockage, some stopping up of words, and the sentences had started arriving. Chapter 1, I wrote, at the top of a fresh page. And this time, they kept coming. I finished my novel 4 months later. It took me 3 years to start it and 4 months to finish it, and I think you already understand why. I think you already know that the thing that had been keeping me from writing my own story was the same thing that had been keeping me from living it: fear. Fear of the dark, yes, but more than that. Fear of being seen, fear of being known, fear that if I put the truest, most vulnerable parts of myself onto the page, they would be found wanting. Jade read every chapter as I wrote it. She sat beside me on our couch, in our apartment, which we moved into together 7 months after Emerald Lake, and she read with the kind of focused attention that made me feel like every word mattered. When she finished the last chapter, she put the pages down and looked at me and didn't say anything for a long moment. "What?" I asked, my heart clenching. "It's brilliant," she said simply. I got a publishing deal 6 weeks later. My editor called it raw and beautiful and achingly real. I cried when I got off the phone. Jade held me while I cried, and then opened a bottle of wine and made me read the email aloud 3 times until I could do it without my voice shaking. A year after Emerald Lake, we are building something. It's ordinary in the best way, messy and imperfect, and full of inside jokes and disagreements about whose turn it is to do the dishes and mornings where everything is soft and quiet and right. I still sleep with a lamp on. Jade has never once asked me to turn it off. I still have panic attacks, sometimes less often now, and less severe, and I have a therapist named Doctor Reeves, who is helping me understand that the basement wasn't my fault, and that the dark has no actual power over me, and that fear, no matter how large it grows, is not the same as truth. I'm learning. Some nights, when the anxiety comes, Jade finds me sitting in the kitchen with all the lights on. And she doesn't ask questions, she just makes tea and sits across from me and stays until I'm ready to go back to bed. She never makes me feel small for needing that. She never makes me feel like a burden. She just stays. She always stays. I used to believe that fear was a room I'd been locked inside, that the dark was a door that would never open. and that I would spend my whole life pressing myself against the crack of light at the bottom, trying to survive on whatever brightness managed to get through. I know better now. The door was never locked from the outside. It was locked from within, by grief, by memory, by the 7-year-old girl who learned too early that the people who were supposed to protect her could sometimes simply forget. She built that lock herself, out of the only materials she had: fear and silence, and the desperate, heartbreaking belief that she would always be alone in the dark. She was wrong. She was wrong. And it took 17 years and a mountain lake and a girl with steady eyes and warm hands to prove it. My name is Nora. I am 25 years old. I am a writer, my own story, finally, in my own words. I sleep with a lamp on, and I am not ashamed of it anymore. And when the lights go out, I am not alone. I never will be again. And if you are reading this, if you have stayed with me through every dark corridor of this story, through every panic attack and stolen glance and whispered confession, then I want to say something to you directly. Not as a writer, just as a girl who once sat on a cold basement floor, certain that no one was coming. Someone is coming. Maybe they're already here. Maybe they're the person who laughs at your worst jokes and remembers how you take your coffee and shows up at your door with exactly the right words at exactly the right time. Maybe you've been looking at them the way I looked at Jade, sideways, carefully, terrified of what it would cost you to want them. Stop being careful. Tell them the dark is not the enemy. Silence is. If this story found something real inside you, if it cracked open even the smallest light in a place that has been closed for a long time, then share it. Pass it on. Because somewhere out there, someone else is sitting in their own darkness right now, convinced they are alone in it. Let them know they're not. And while you're here, if you haven't already, subscribe to Love Beyond Rules. Leave a comment below and tell me, what does love look like when it finds you at your most afraid? I read every single one. This has been Nora's story. But honestly, I think it might be yours too.